Okay, we're going to keep going with workbook connections and just got done with pulling in this arrows data. What I'm actually going to do is select this and delete, and I'm going to delete this pivot table as well. Just going to delete everything in there. Check this out in my data connections and nothing, it's gone. So you can see that that actually happened. I'm going to add a data connection now. So let's go ahead and go to this workbook connections and just connections. I'm actually going to pull in a connection from an Access database, but I'm going to do it this way just to show you. A lot of this is an iterative process where you see it frequently, and then if you're like me, the light bulb comes on one day and you're going, oh, that's how that works, got it, and then you can just repeat. So when I connect to that Access database, so if I can show you that real quickly, let me pull this back. Data used, it says data collection because that's exactly what it is for me. Right now I'm doing videos and stuff and my CPU's at 89–90%. It takes a little time. How realistic is that for the pivot table video? Well, whenever you get more advanced, you're going to want to just be aware of all the things that are happening. So anyways, this is the connection to this Access database. So there are how many ever tables this is, and then the query. So this is actually a connection to a query in the Access database. And I'm going to go ahead and pull in, let's find one that I want. Chris BQ and DeemSoft. So this is like a combined BQ and DeemSoft pull that I have. And it's added. You can see it's a data connection added. If I go to properties, definition, it says went and found data collection ACCDB Access database, and then the command text that query is Chris BQ DeemSoft. Okay, I'm going to hit OK and close. So I have a connection, and then if I wanted to go ahead and pull that data in, connection, it says table. So I created the connection first and then pulled it in, just to show you that functionality. Now this is the connected data in that Access database. I scroll across, and here, if you're familiar with the status of funds or the STH, and you'd be familiar with this, but see, there's no formulas. I just get the raw data because when we filter it through that Access database, it comes in like this, and now I can use it. So I have a data table. Let me hit Alt-NV. I'm going to put this in my existing worksheet over here. Alright, so this is BQ and Deem, so I'm going to do ADSN. I would just remind you, if you were going to use this, know to validate it, know to validate these, but for the purposes of doing pivot tables and building them, this is why we're doing this. Refer to the videos for the status of funds for those purposes. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to go find some of these things. Where's my funds control? That's important. Commodities important. So again, design, report, layout, show and tabular. See all these grand totals. It thinks I want to subtotal and grand total everything. Off and off like in the previous videos. Row headers, turn that off. Come down to my normal formatted colors there. So I'm going to come and look at this here. I definitely want to subtotal ADSN, and let me go ahead now and start to pull out those same things that I want. Annual direct, quarterly direct. Uh-oh, look at that. Immediately I know my annual direct came in as not a number, it came in as text. Now, why would it do that? And quarterly did the same thing. Why would it do that? Well, it's because in that raw data there is a field. It could be, you could have 1,000 records in your data. If 1 out of 1,000 is a text value, whenever Excel looks at it, it's going to take a guess and go, well, 1 out of 1,000 is not a number, so everything is not a number. That's what happens. So you can kind of forcibly do these things where you drag it over and it says count, and I say, hey, I want a sum, I don't want to count. Okay, so if that happens, then that's why it happens. It's because you have maybe 1 out of 1,000. That's not a number, so the default is, okay, everything's not a number. Alright, so let's carry on. Uncommitted quarterly, uncommitted annual. Let me throw gross obligations again. Look at that. I must have 1 or 2 lines in every record that's just not a number, which is okay. We can, in this case, you just go back to the raw data. Perhaps we didn't delete a column. Perhaps we have something going on, and then we research it that way. But I'm showing you how we kind of overcome this situation. In all honesty, I didn't know that there was anything like that, so I'm kind of showing you. See these blanks? That's probably exactly what that is. It's kind of letting me see that. And it brings up a good point. A pivot table, whenever you look at your data, it can be used primarily or initially to look at your data, to see what it's comprised of. It's very good practice to kind of get a real quick high-level snapshot of what is in your data before you get to the 10th step in the process and then figure out, oh, this stuff is this is bad, I got to go back and do it again. So potentially use it for those uses. But in this case, I'm going to do Control F, replace some of it remembered from the last videos, replace all, and hit OK, and close. Select up here, analyze, select the entire pivot table, right click, format cells. I'm going to do a border, excuse me, and look at that now. And you know what, I am going to subtotal my budget activity level, give it a little fill and color, go back in there and give it a bit of a different feel, so I'm going to go with the gray here. So this is important again with the pivot table. This is how we separate these things out that are important to us. And I see those grid lines. Maybe you like the grid lines. I do not. View, grid lines, take them out. But let's say, well, I don't like grid lines, but I do like distinctions. So banded rows, banded columns, right? So, and then you can come in there and mess with the color and format. But again, external data connection. This time it's flowing through an Access database. Stuff happens. Obviously you can see that this all happened somewhere else, but then you pull it in and you are good to go. Now we'll go to external data connections, because you could be thinking to yourself, Chad, we didn't do anything with this data. It came from an Access database, and in our other things we do have these. We use things like this concatenate function, and then the calculations are happening in one workbook. So imagine all this is getting calculated in this same workbook, so we can use it over here. I'm showing you workbook connections and then pivot tables to kind of iterate through this to show you the possibilities. But let's go ahead and, like we did before, let's go ahead and delete this and delete this. You can see how quickly you can get to a workable product, something that's valuable. And in those cases, you just refresh and you're good to go again. You download from Chris, download from Deems, and that pivot table connection refresh, it's an awesome thing. I'm going to go ahead and by the way, I had this one selected. I'm going to hold Shift and select this other one. It groups the two tabs. I'm going to right click and hide. Now anytime you're in a workbook, just taking a side trip here, unhide, you can take a look at what's in your workbook that's hidden. So those first few, I just hid them. Just make sure that if you're doing that you know they're there, or check for them. Back to external only. So data, connections, I have nothing, so let's show you how to do it this way. If I know my data is great, and let's just say that Access database has some data that's great. So I'm going to hit Alt-NV for pivot table, and instead of saying select a range, I'm going to use an external source and choose connection. So let me go ahead and find where I could use this. I could definitely use this because this is a connection I just did. But let me go ahead and do this one more time. Data integration, video tutorials, Excel pivot tables. Back into this Access database. Now one thing to note while this is kind of thinking, once I do an external data connection, this won't be an option, so I can't then pull in the data to my table and then reconnect the pivot to the existing data like one next to another. If I create an external data connection as I just did here, let me go ahead and find another one that is, let's do AFM balancing real quick. Once I create this connection, and it's going to say OK, and then it's going to say pivot there. I said I want a pivot table, choose an external connection, it pulls it in. If I go to this analyze data source, change data source, well, I can change it, the connection here, but I can't change it here. So I might have built an awesome pivot table based on one particular set of data, and then I said, well, I want this data in my workbook. You're going to need to recreate that pivot table. Okay, so again, with this pivot table, that chose my AFN balancing. So let me see what's going on here, if I can create an actual pivot table out of this while we're here. So fiscal year, fund code. Let's try to keep it simple. PSR annual direct, and let's find that AFM annual design report layout. Turn these off for now. Turn that off. I want to subtotal my fiscal years, and I definitely want to subtotal this. Well, wait a second. Why don't we go ahead and do this? So fund code, pull it up to columns. See how it did that again with the numbers AFM. Let's do a sum and sum. Now again, this is if your data's perfect. Filter out these ones. Got this going on, right? So we have fund code 5856. I think I have a delta, quarterly delta. Put this in here. Reimbursement delta. Let me do sum. So in this particular case, I would say that my data is not perfect, but it's good to see this. So deltas are not showing. I've got all that stuff going perfectly for here. That's good. Annual direct probably would want, instead of annual, maybe want quarterly direct in there, but I think you get the idea here with this pivot table. External data only is the point I'm trying to get across. What we will do moving forward is we're going to do use cases. So this AFM data and the other tools that we build, we're going to build the pivot tables from scratch in those use cases, so we'll see exactly how those go together. But just to recap, we saw external data only, we saw workbook connections, we saw ad hoc pivot tables from somebody sending you something, and in the first part of this series we talked about some real basics about pivot tables and a lot of the options that you can see. So there may be some more videos added to this series, but I really wanted you to get familiar with how you can get a pivot table connected in the workbook, not in the workbook, the connection between the table itself and the pivot table, how it will look at the data. So we will see you in the next video series or in the next set of these pivot table videos.